Before we get to our big story tonight, we need to tell you about breaking news happening now in the Columbia Gorge. This is a live picture where a fire is broken out in the Dalles. Our camera is posted on the Oregon Veterans Home. You can see the smoke plume there out in the distance going from the left to the right, pushed by the wind. We also just got this video in from a viewer driving down I-84. The fire appears to be close to the interstate, but it's still open. It's not clear yet what is burning, although it does appear to be some of the scrub land that's out there. Officials tell us they're evacuating people around mile marker 87. That's on the right. That's right near the intersection of Highway 197. We're working to get more information on that. But for now, let's bring in Matt Zaffino to talk about the weather conditions as firefighters try to knock this thing down. Matt?
Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. That Highway 197 and I-84 interchange is at the east side of the Dalles. Our camera on the Oregon Veterans Home is a little bit west of that, so we're looking to the northeast here, and you can see the smoke plume blowing, and notice how close it is to the ground. That tells you that the winds are really whipping out here, not allowing that smoke plume to go up very high in the atmosphere at all. So let's put the weather conditions over it. First of all, the winds. Sustained at 22, but just in the last hour, gusting to 35 miles an hour in the Dalles. That is way too strong for firefighters. I mean, it's tough to combat that when the wind is pushing the flames that high, and the low humidity not helping the cause either. Now, I want to show you the winds elsewhere in the state because it's, strong gusts in the Dalles. I had a gust earlier today of 45 miles an hour, Pendleton 35, super windy across all of eastern Oregon there. So the fire weather conditions, the high fire danger continues because of those strong winds. They will ease overnight more than they did last night as our weather conditions will begin to calm down a bit, but the humidity will continue to be very low even in the overnight hours. Firefighters and fire weather people look at something called humidity recovery because typically humidity goes up overnight as the air mass cools, but with certain conditions like this, especially when it's windy, you don't get that recovery to higher humidity overnight. It's just very, very dry air. Temperatures, this helps a little bit. These are the morning lows, and the Dalles and Pendleton stayed pretty warm, but elsewhere down in the low 40s because of this colder air mass that moved on in. So that will help tonight as the winds ease overnight tonight, Pat. The temperatures will drop more tonight than they did last night in the Dalles, so that'll help. But it's really what will really help is seeing those winds calm down. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Matt. Seems like they're in the middle of it right now. Appreciate it. In the meantime, tonight, we've been wading through confusing signals all day on whether there's an agreement to end the Senate walkout in Salem. And because it's such a big deal and the work or lack thereof impacts all of us, that Senate walkout is our big story tonight. There was an optimistic mood at the Oregon State Capitol today that the walkout would end. But so far tonight, no chance. It's still on. The 6-week boycott is the longest in state history, and it's the second longest of any state in the U.S., behind a 6-month walkout in Rhode Island that was 99 years ago. So, yeah, we're out there. There were rumblings this afternoon that a press conference was coming to announce a deal, and then there wasn't, and then it was back and forth again. We do know the Democrats and Republicans, the leadership, have been meeting and negotiating to try to come to some sort of compromise. But nothing's come of those talks yet. Earlier this week, OPB reported through sources that a potential deal would see Democrats making major concessions on bills concerning abortion and guns. The first is House Bill 2002. That's the one that deals with abortion and gender-affirming care. OPB reports that a compromise there would be getting away from giving girls under the age of 15 the absolute right to get an abortion without their parents' permission or knowledge. Instead, a doctor could decide the parents do not need to be notified if it would endanger the girl. The other bill that would be drastically changed would be a big one on gun safety. House Bill 2005 sets strict penalties for the creation or transfer of untraceable guns. Those are known as ghost guns. It would also raise the age to buy certain guns from 18 to 21 and would allow for more limited concealed carry rights. But OPB reported this week that a compromise could gut that bill to only include the provisions on ghost guns. Again, those are just some possibilities of the compromise, both sides staying very quiet today and this afternoon and this evening even on negotiations. So it's very possible that none of those options bear fruit, but that's what's been floating around out there, so it's also possible that it all happens. One firm update that we do have for you tonight concerns the quorum rules in the Oregon Constitution. That's the law that allows for walkouts to have this paralyzing effect in Salem that we've seen over the past 6 weeks. Today, more than 40 Democratic senators and representatives signed on to this resolution. If passed, it would ask voters to change the two-thirds quorum requirement to a simple majority instead. We've previously shown that Oregon is just one of 4 states in the country to require two-thirds of lawmakers in either chamber to be present for a quorum to allow business to get done. Those are the states in blue there. 45 other states in orange require a simple majority. And Massachusetts makes it far too complicated to even really explain it to you. Now, this latest resolution in Salem has little to no chance of passing this session. That's because there are only 11 days left in the session, and even if the walkout ends, this bill probably won't see the light of day because of all the budget bills that would require immediate attention. One of the sponsors of the resolution told OPB today that the issue could be taken up during the short session next year or potentially become a petition to allow the measure onto the 2024 ballot. Either way, it's clear that Measure 113 was not the walkout deterrent that advocates had hoped it would be, and the quorum change would be an effective method to prevent walkouts in the future if voters pass it. And one final note on the goings-on in Salem this week. Remember how the Senate Democrats voted to fine the senators who are walking out by $325 a day? Well, that's the average daily amount that the lawmakers are getting. This week, apparently as a gesture of goodwill, Senate President Rob Wagner has gavelled in the Senate sessions, but purposely did not do a roll call. That's important because that means a quorum was not even called for, meaning the GOP senators were not fined for preventing a quorum this week. Add up the past 3 days, and that decision by the Senate president is saving the GOP senators nearly $1,000. Now to the homeless crisis in Portland. Last week, we told you about the daytime camping ban that passed through the city council. It will take effect next month and will feature an education period before any kind of enforcement begins. What exactly that enforcement will look like, though, is still kind of a mystery, with several city leaders saying they don't expect to send homeless people to jail, even though the ban would allow that after 2 written warnings. Another big question, what about the homeless folks living in RVs? Well, turns out the ban does include them too. It's just not on tents on sidewalks. It's also RVs and cars. But as Blair Best explains, many who live in RVs have no clue about the upcoming ban or where they would go.
Velma Carter considers herself a fortunate homeless person since she lives in this RV and not on the sidewalk.
It's my 1-bedroom apartment that just happens to have wheels on it.
Last week, Portland City Council passed a ban on camping on public property between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Many of those discussions focused on tents blocking sidewalks and businesses, but RVs are also included. Homeless people like Velma didn't know that.
I'm terrified of it. If they're going to be banning that, how soon till they ban RVs?
Yeah, so RVs are included in this ban.
Oh boy. Not what I've been reading. Oh boy.
They're telling us to literally just disappear. There's nowhere to disappear to.
For people like Velma and Zaina, who use their RV as a campsite, under this new ordinance, they have to follow the city's general parking rules between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., which means they have to be lawfully parked, which is almost impossible for them to do, given the state of their RV.
I can't lawfully park this thing at all. Its VIN number doesn't exist in a DMV database. I can't register it. No matter what, it's an abandoned vehicle because it's a ghost rig that's been jimmy-rigged and parted together too much.
Now she's left to move her makeshift rig during the day, which she says takes time away from getting back on her feet.
That's job hunting time. How am I going to be job hunting with a house on my back?
We keep the doors locked, you saw. Every single day. For years, we've never unlocked the doors.
Brianna Setoff works at a nearby hair salon, surrounded by tents and RVs.
I've called 311 a bunch of times just to have it cleaned up.
She often feels unsafe at work, but isn't confident that this camping ban will change that.
If we're not going to implement services, mental health, anything, I think it's ridiculous.
Instead of telling us we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this, we can't do that, tell us what we can do.
The city says they can go into available shelter.
I have tried shelters before in the past. I've gone through TPI. A lot of the shelters, like right now with my animals, it's really difficult to do.
And then there are places like here, out on Northeast 33rd Drive, lined with dozens of campers and RVs, each considered a campsite. Now, many of them don't run and have been sitting out here for years. So how or will they be moved every day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.? That part is still unclear. Blair Best, KGW News.
Super interesting, Blair. Thank you. Several questions about the camping ban do remain. And like we said before, enforcement really is the biggest issue. If there are not any consequences for breaking the rule, will anything really even change? Blair joins us with more on what she heard on the streets today and what she's heard from city leaders.
All right, Pat, so there still seems to be a lot of unknowns when it comes to this ordinance, specifically the enforcement part, but also the ordinance itself, right? I talked with several homeless people today who had no idea that this ordinance even existed, and many of them did not know that RVs were included in this campsite ban. They were considered a campsite. I wasn't even sure of that last week when the ordinance passed. So there still seems to be a lot of education that needs to be done when it comes to this ordinance and talking with people out on the streets. But the enforcement piece is particularly confusing in my eyes because it says, after 3 warnings, if someone doesn't move their campsite, they could go to jail or, face fines. But last week, when I talked with commissioners, they said the likelihood of that happening is slim. And then I saw an interview someone did with the DA who echoed that same sentiment. So there's this clause in here that's causing a lot of stress and anxiety out here on the streets, yet the officials are saying it's not even going to be enforced. So my question is, why is that clause even included if it's causing the most unrest?
Thanks, Blair. That's as clear as mud. Up next on the story, a hidden danger lurking in certain kinds of cookware. What you need to watch out for and why it's impacting Afghan immigrants in the Pacific Northwest. That's when the story returns. Health officials in the state of Washington have been trying to sound the alarm about certain types of imported cookware that could poison your food. But according to investigators with our sister station in Seattle, that message is just not getting through. Chris Ingalls shows us how the products are still marketed and sold to unsuspecting consumers on popular websites.
I'm going to show you how to cook with this Afghan pressure cooker.
Get it nice and hot. I'm gonna melt a little butter in it.
Don't let the flames get too big where it licks up around the sides.
On YouTube, there's no shortage of videos with tips and tricks for cooking with the traditional Afghan pressure cooker. The ingenious cookers make a hot and fast meal over a live fire and might seem like a hungry camper's best friend. But these pots are among a range of imported cookware that's drawing warnings from public health investigators. Warnings because of what has happened to thousands of Afghan immigrants who call the Seattle area home, like Faisal Haq Safi and his family. Mr. Safi, this is very nice. This is beautiful.
I'm glad to meet you guys. Welcome to my home.
He has prepared an elaborate meal for us, his guests, as is the Afghan custom. When it comes to the main course, however, chicken and rice, Mr. Safi is using a shiny new stainless steel Instant Pot instead of the aluminum Afghan pressure cooker he's used all his life.
A lot of Afghans still are using it. Unfortunately, we don't know anything about the lead poisoning.
Lead poisoning. When he came to the United States in 2021, blood tests revealed higher than normal lead levels in his now 7- and 8-year-old children.
We went to the public health in downtown Seattle. We tested our kids. They did the blood test, everything, so they tested positive. I was worried about it already. I knew that something was going on.
Something was going on in the Afghan community that was uncovered by the nonprofit Afghan Health Initiative and King County public health scientists in 2018. Blood tests showed Afghans had the highest lead levels of any immigrant population.
It's really, really detrimental to the development of children. So there's a lot of developmental delays, mental health issues, things like ADHD. And so we had determined that there was a huge amount of lead in these traditional cookware.
Health officials believe the Afghan manufacturer uses lead-filled scrap metal, even old car engines, to forge pressure cookers marketed as aluminum. But convincing families to swap them out isn't easy.
And it's a very slow process because it's something so near and dear to the culture, as well as something that's very, very common in our families.
Meantime, the use of the cookers has expanded beyond the Afghan community. King County health officials have been unable to persuade the government and online retailers to halt their sale. It's easy to get your hands on one of these cookers. We got this one with just a few clicks. We ordered 2 pressure cookers from the biggest online marketplace, Amazon, and a third from the website Etsy. This is the pot we got off Amazon from Men Grills. So why don't we start with this one right here. We took our 3 pots to King County's environmental scientist, Katie Fellows.
I work for the Department of Public Health with the Hazardous Waste Management Program. So we have a device called an X-ray fluorescence analyzer, or XRF analyzer.
Cookware is supposed to be lead-free.
Any lead is too much lead.
Her analyzer reveals this about the lead level in the first pot.
34K means 34,000 parts per million lead. That is a very large amount of lead.
Okay, so this one's not good.
No, that one contains lead.
This would make somebody sick.
Potentially, yes.
And the second pot. 36,000
parts per million. It's 36,000. It's that last one on the bottom. You see PB for lead.
And the final cooker. What number did you get here?
We got 33,000.
33,000 parts per million.
Correct.
The results don't surprise Fellows because over the years she's tested nearly 100 imported aluminum pots and pans.
Indian cookware, like most of the cookware you're actually holding, is made of Hindallium.
Almost all have contained high lead levels. King County's Hazardous Waste Management Program said further testing showed lead that leached into food from the cookware exceeded FDA limits by almost 900-fold, according to letters the health department sent to Amazon and Etsy's corporate offices. Fellows recommends you avoid aluminum cookware.
What should people buy? What should they be looking for?
Purchase stainless steel cookware. As far as we know, and all the stainless steel cookware that we have tested, it should not contain lead.
Very delicious.
Mr. Safi got his stainless steel cooker through a health department program for Afghan families, along with news that his children's lead poisoning was caught in time, and they will suffer no ill effects.
I am so worried, and I'm glad that I participated through the Afghan Health Initiative.
That's amazing. I mean, otherwise, I'm so glad Chris did that story. How else would you know? Anyway, Etsy did not respond to Chris for this story. Amazon emailed him back to say the products in question were no longer available, but the pots that he tested in that story were still for sale after they sent that email. So kind of seems like Amazon maybe removed some of the items, but not all of them. Still to come on the story, did you know today is a national holiday? It's Flag Day, arguably one of the lesser celebrated of the national holidays, but its origin story stretches back to the American Revolution. So how did we get here when it comes to Flag Day? We'll explain when the story returns.
Up next at 6:30, nurses set to strike. New details from Providence on what patients can expect and why some may want to have a backup plan. Plus, it's the city in Oregon dealing with a serial tree thief. And no, we're not talking about the whole thing. What somebody is stealing from trees that could be making them thousands. That's next at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
You might be surprised to learn today is a holiday here in the U.S. It's Flag Day. It's not a federal holiday, so the post office and the banks were still open earlier today, but it's still recognized as a holiday for Americans. So why is it celebrated and how did it all begin? Let's go back in time to figure out how we got here. The origins of the holiday stretch back nearly 250 years to June 14th, 1777, in the midst of the Revolutionary War. That's when the Continental Congress approved the design of a national flag. Here's what the resolution said back then. Resolved that the flag of the 13 United States shall be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, that the Union be 13 stars, white on a blue field, representing a new constellation. As far as who designed the first U.S. flag, that really depends on who you ask. Legend has it that George Washington commissioned Philadelphia seamstress Betsy Ross to create the flag. But The Library of Congress says most historians believe it was actually designed by Congressman Francis Hopkinson, and Betsy Ross sewed some of the earliest versions. Because the colony was fighting the British, it did not take long for that new flag to see battle. Just 3 months after the congressional resolution, the flag was carried into the Battle of Brandywine in Pennsylvania. That ended in defeat for the Americans, by the way, but it helped show the colonists that they could withstand the full brunt of the Brits, which helped with confidence in later battles. The Department of Veteran Affairs says sources vary on when the first Flag Day was actually observed. Hartford, Connecticut claims the earliest celebration in 1861. School programs observing the holiday popped up in the late 1800s. Thanks to a New York City school ceremony, they got the attention of education officials. But national recognition of the holiday, that would take decades to achieve. President Woodrow Wilson issued the first presidential proclamation that helped to establish the Flag Day in 1916, but nothing came of it. President Calvin Coolidge followed suit in 1927, asking for June 14th to be observed as National Flag Day, and still nothing was done. It wasn't until 1949 that Congress approved legislation that designated June 14th each year as Flag Day, and President Harry Truman signed the bill into law. 172 years after the initial resolution passed by the Continental Congress, the National Flag Day holiday was official. By the way, there have been 27 official designs of the flag since its inception. Isn't that amazing? The stripes have stayed mostly the same, but early versions had all kinds of star placements, and that's because they were determined by the flag makers where they wanted to put those stars. But that all changed in 1912. That's when President Taft standardized the flags, then 48 stars into 6 rows of 8. The current version of the flag that we see today dates back to July 4th, 1960, when Hawaii became the 50th state. So how is Flag Day actually celebrated? Well, most people will tell you it's just another day of the week. But the actual United States Code says the president is asked to issue a proclamation every year that calls on the government officials to display the flag outside of all government buildings. And the commander-in-chief should also urge Americans to observe the day as the anniversary that June 14th, way back in 1777, as colonists fought for independence. Here's part of President Biden's Flag Day proclamation this year. On Flag Day and during National Flag Week, we celebrate the enduring strength and promise that the stars and stripes on our flag have always embodied as they fly proudly across our country and around the world. How's that? Now you have all kinds of Flag Day knowledge. I hope you use it wisely. Don't try to stump your neighbors, just inform them. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. And a programming note for you, we do not have shows for tomorrow and Friday because of the U.S. Open Golf Tournament. So don't worry when you don't see us. We'll be back right here on Monday, which is Juneteenth federal holiday, by the way. In the meantime, stick around for the news at 6:30 and enjoy the rest of your Flag Day.